was nothing but trees, open space, and a large tin shed that I used as an art studio. It sat about 25 yards from my dilapidated trailer. I'd managed to accumulate enough money over the years to build a mansion with giant walls to keep everyone out if I so desired, but I knew that would have drawn attention to myself.
Early the next morning, Li Ming awoke to the sound of her mother-in-law setting a fire for the morning meal in the central courtyard. It was 4 a.m. She gathered herself together and got up from her metal spring bed. She had taken a wash and packed the small bag the night before to save time. They would need to catch the 5:30 a.m. train.
1,387 souls, most of whom lost their lives in fighting in June 1944 and the months that followed. These young men of my generation, died in the fight against evil. It was a fight I had longed so desperately to be part of. Now I was here to pay my respects to them, and to one in particular. My wife Sylvia, it's me, and I traveled to France, enjoying a boat cruise down the Seine en route to Normandy. Although I had not landed here in 1944 with a rifle in my hands, I had visited France many times in decades to follow. I had done business here and made friends. Still, the culmination, the main purpose really was to come to Normandy. It wasn't easy. International travel is difficult for most people of my age, and particularly as I must use a wheelchair. So why make this difficult journey when I could have, say, visited the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, or said a prayer in church on Memorial Day, or simply watch the famous D-Day movie, Saving Private Ryan, or The Longest Day, in the comfort of my living room. Because in my opinion, this is a place every American should visit to understand the significance of what happened here and the sacrifices made. For me, though, it was something more. I carried with me to France a piece of paper with a name and a few sentences scribbled on it, information we found from online service records. Bowen was born in 1921, 3 years before me. He grew up in New York City, borough of Queens, same as me. According to his enlistment records, he was 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighed 123 pounds, a string bean, much as I had been at that age. I found Bowen's name while searching D-Day veterans in Queens. I didn't know him personally, but he could have easily been one of my pals. He was probably like a lot of the guys I grew up with in Queens and Ozone Park, many of whom, like Bowen, did march off to war in late 1941 and 42. He would have been a kid during the Great Depression, and perhaps like me, could very well have known the anxiety of having a father out of work. I felt I really knew Francis Bowen, even though we never met. And in the back of my mind, the refrain that had echoed now, more loudly than ever, the realization that as part of what drove me here in the twilight of my life to visit a young man who was cut down in the prime of his life. This could have been me. Why did I survive? Why was I given the opportunity to live the life and do the things I'd done, while he never lived beyond 23rd birthday? Now that I finally arrived, I was anxious and needed to clarify, in my own mind at least, what had compelled me to come all this way. I tried to put some of my thoughts about this in the form of a poem, about my need to pay homage to Bowen and his comrades, about my search for some kind of answer to the question, why them and not me? About why I was on a cruise ship, enjoying my cold golden years, and they were buried in the French soil. I asked God for something that I suspect is unusual in petitions to Him. I asked for lousy weather. So far it had been a sunny, crisp fall day in our trip to France, but I didn't want that for Normandy. I wanted it to be the way it was the time of D-Day, when a system of storms and gale force threatened to halt the entire operation. I told God that I wanted this so that I could be there in spirit with the boys. The next morning, a gale had blown up on the English Channel. The winds were very fierce, the rain was blowing sideways. It was worse than on the morning of June 6th. Finally, we came to the designated spot. We checked the number. This was it. But to my disappointment, we were looking at what appeared a blank white cross. I guess this is it, I said. And I took the poem out of my pocket and I began to read it aloud. I had barely begun when a woman appeared out of nowhere. She wore a blue raincoat and had a white scarf covering her head. You could hardly see her face. She said, "Are you trying to see the name?" she asked. "Yes," we said. "You need one of these," she said, holding up what appeared to be a little cup filled with sand. She handed it to me. "Like so," she said, pantomiming a motion across the center of the granite cross. I rolled up close to the headstone and rubbed it with the moistened sand, which I later learned came from Omaha Beach, below the bluffs that the cemetery was built on. The principle is that the wet sand fills in the carvings of the grave for better visibility. The effect is startling. There appeared the name carved on the cross, Francis N. Bowen. I finished the poem, and I said a few words in silence to Bowen. "I've come a long way to see."
You have to take pictures of this.
I got Adam and Eve.
Unfortunately, my husband Walter could not attend today. He would have loved to have been here, but he's not well, so he sent me his wife, Sylvia. And I'm going to read a chapter from his books, Saving Private Bowen. On a rain-swept bluff overlooking Omaha Beach, I wept before the grave of a man I had never met. It was October 2014, and at the age of 90, I finally made my way to the hallowed ground of the American Cemetery at Normandy, the filing resting place for 9,387 souls, most of whom lost their lives in the fighting of June 1944 and the months that followed. These young men of my generation, died in the fight against evil. It was a fight I longed to desperately be part of. Now I was here to pay my respects to them, and to one in particular. My wife Sylvia and I traveled to France, enjoying a boat cruise down the Seine en route to Normandy. Although I had not landed here in 1944 with a rifle in my hands, I visited France many times in decades to follow. I did business here and made friends. Still, the culmination, the main purpose really, was to come to Normandy. It wasn't easy. International travel is difficult for most people of my age, and particularly as I must use a wheelchair. So why make this difficult journey when I could have, say, visited the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, or said a prayer in church on Memorial Day, or just rewatched the famous D-Day movie, Saving Private Ryan, or The Longest Day, in the comfort of my living room. Because in my opinion, this is a place every American should visit to understand the significance of what happened here and the sacrifices made. For me, it was something more. I had carried with me to France a piece of paper with a name and a few sentences scribbled on it, information we found from online service records. Bowen was born in 1921, 3 years before me. He grew up in the New York City borough of Queens, same as me. According to his enlistment records, he was 5'10". He weighed 123 pounds, a string bean, much as I had been at that age. I found Bowen's name while searching D-Day veterans from Queens. I didn't know him personally, but he could have easily been one of my pals. He was probably like a lot of the guys I grew up with in the Queens community of Ozone Park, many of whom, like Bowen, marched off to war in late 1941 and 42. He would have been a kid during the Great Depression, and like me, could have very well have known the anxiety of having a father out of work. I felt I really knew Francis Bowen, even though we never met. In the back of my mind, the refrain that had echoed now more loudly than ever, the realization that is part of what drove me here in the twilight of my life, to visit a young man who was cut down in the prime of his life. This could have been me. Why did I survive? Why was I given the opportunity to live the life and do the things I'd done while he didn't live beyond his 23rd birthday? Now that I finally arrived, I was anxious and needed to clarify, in my own mind at least, what had compelled me to come all this way. I tried to put some of my thoughts about this in the form of a poem, about my need to pay homage to Bowen and his comrades, about my search for some kind of answer to the question of why them and not me, about why I was on a cruise ship enjoying my golden years and they were buried in French soil. I asked God for something that is unusual in petitions to him. I asked for lousy weather. So far it was sunny, crisp fall days on our trip to France. But I didn't want that for Normandy. I wanted it to be the way it was the time of D-Day, when storms and gale force winds threatened to halt the entire operation. I told God I wanted this so that I could be there in spirit with the boys. The next morning, a gale blown up on the English Channel. The winds were fierce, the rain blowing sideways. It was far worse than on the morning of June 6th. Finally, we came to the designated spot. We checked the number. There it was. But to my disappointment, we were looking at what happened to appear to be a blank white cross. I guess this is it, I said, and I took the poem out of my pocket and began to read it aloud. I had barely begun when a woman appeared out of nowhere. She had on a blue raincoat, a white scarf covering her head. You can hardly see her face. "Are you trying to see the name?" she asked. "Yes," we said. "You need one of these," she said, holding up what appeared to be a little cup filled with sand. She handed it to me. "Like so," she said, pantomiming a rubbing motion across the center of the granite cross. I rolled up close to the headstone, rubbed it with the moistened sand, which I later learned came from Omaha Beach, below the bluffs the cemetery was built on. The principle is that the wet sand fills in the carvings of the grave for better visibility, but the effect is startling. There appeared the name carved on the cross, Francis N. Bowen. I finished the poem and I said a few words in silence to Bowen. "I've come a long way to see you." My husband wrote this book, and all proceeds from the book are going to children with cerebral palsy and autism, a foundation that he started years ago. And the books are here, and we'd like you to take one, and you can make a contribution to the Center for Discovery. There's a memo inside the front page. He would appreciate if you would do that. Thank you very much.
Gotowi?